What's up everyone, and welcome back to my Echoes of Time channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. 27 things you didn't know about the Crusades. What happened during the Crusades? What were the Crusades about? This is one of the most misunderstood times in Western history. From 1095 to 1291, the Catholic Church called for a group of Christian knights and royals to go to the Holy Land and try to wrest it back from Muslim soldiers. But the truth behind the Crusades is much more complicated than that. There were many crusades, led by hundreds of knights, kings, and dukes, and they didn't always focus on seizing Jerusalem. They tried to free Jerusalem, but they also took over other ancient cities and destroyed priceless treasures and culture. There were 9 official crusades that began. The First Crusade in 1095 was the start of 9 great crusades. All of them had armies of Christian knights, who were fighters of God who made a public commitment, coming from Europe to the Holy Land to liberate it from Muslim authority. However, the details of each crusade were different, such as who was fighting and where they were heading. There were also many lesser crusades. There were a lot of lesser crusades outside the 9 big ones. Most of these entailed a monarch or duke recruiting an army and sending it to free a certain city or place. They happened all over Europe, from France to what is now Turkey. The call for the First Crusade came straight from the top. In 1095, the Seljuk Turks had such tight control over Jerusalem that Christians couldn't get there. When the Turks threatened to take over the Byzantine Empire, Emperor Alexius I petitioned Pope Urban II for help with the troops. Urban II quickly called the Council of Clermont in November 1095 and ended it with a powerful speech. Urban spoke out against Islam in front of hundreds of priests and nobles, saying that its crimes against Christians, most of which probably never happened, were wrong, and urged the rich and poor to join together in a religious war against them. "God wills it," was the battle cry that started the Crusades. The rules for fighting for crusading knights were rather complicated. To stop what people thought was an unquenchable hunger for killing and conquest, knights in the Middle Ages had to follow a complicated set of religious rules for battle. The peace of God saved church property, women, children, the elderly, and other non-combatants from being destroyed. The Truce of God, which was added to the Peace of God in the 11th century, limited the number of days on which war may start. Fridays, Saturdays, Advent, and Lent were not allowed. There were only 80 days left for fighting. Most people think that the Peace of God and the Truce of God were failures, although they were very important steps toward the Crusades and helped bring order back to Western Europe, which had been torn apart by conflict. The First Crusade went much better than anyone thought it would. Urban II's call to arms was a big success. Most of the tens of thousands of people who wanted to join the growing Crusader army were peasants who had never been in the military before. It's not clear how many men left Europe for Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, in August 1096, but most people agree that it was around 35,000 men headed by 4 different kings. After that, they went to Asia Minor and besieged several significant cities, including Nicaea and Antioch. They finally got to Jerusalem in 1099. The fortified city was attacked on a few sides, but barely 1/3 of the initial 35,000 troops were still there. The Crusaders took the city when the defenders left the fortifications and entered Jerusalem. They formed the Kingdom of Jerusalem, took over the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and killed most of the Jewish and Muslim defenders who were still alive. The First Crusade was a huge success for Europeans who didn't mind killing a lot of people. Also, it wasn't the First Crusade. The People's Crusade happened before the First Crusade, which started in 1096. A monk named Peter the Hermit led an army of women, children, peasants, priests, petty knights, and monks to Jerusalem. The untrained mob marched south, killing a few Jews along the way, until the Seljuk Turks beat them twice in a row. At the Battle of Civitate, Peter the Hermit lost almost all of his army. Only a few thousand men made it back to Constantinople, and they never got close to Jerusalem. The Crusaders of Victory made their own countries after the Middle Eastern conquests. The Kingdom of Jerusalem was set up in 1099 after the Holy City fell. There were also a number of other Crusader states. These areas were set up by Crusaders who went to the Holy Land and decided to stay there to convert non-believers and show off the power of the Church. For example, the county of Edessa in what is now Turkey was set up in 1098 and lasted for almost 50 years before being attacked, which led to the Second Crusade. The First Crusade also led to the creation of the Principality of Antioch, which is now part of Turkey and Syria. The Sultan of Egypt and Syria reclaimed it back in 1268. There were a lot more Crusader states in the next 200 years, but by the end of the 13th century, most of them had been taken over by other kingdoms. People who didn't go on the First Crusade started their own. A lot of the people who went on the First Crusade either never left Europe or turned back during the trip. But it worked so well that many of these people were made fun of and mocked. Because of this, the Crusade of 1101, also called the Crusade of the Faint-Hearted, was planned and left Constantinople, stealing and killing along the way. The Crusaders were finally defeated at the Battle of Mersavan in northern Turkey after being attacked non-stop by Turkish troops. In 2 further battles, the Crusaders were almost completely wiped out. There are many interesting facts about the history of the Crusades. These are some of the most interesting things about the Crusades throughout this difficult time. Pope Urban II did not live long enough to see what happened after his furious sermon. Pope Urban died less than a year after asking people to launch the First Crusade. 2 weeks earlier, Jerusalem had fallen, but the news hadn't reached Rome yet when he died on July 29, 1099. The Second Crusade was a terrible failure. Zangi, a Seljuk Turk general and ruler of Mosul, took the Crusader state of Edessa in 1144. The next year, Pope Eugenius III issued a call to arms, just like Urban II did in 1098. King Conrad III of Germany and King Louis VII of France both answered the summons for the Second Crusade, thanks to the mystical monk Bernard of Clairvaux. They gathered a large army and marched to Constantinople to get Edessa back and strengthen Jerusalem. The attack was poorly organized, and the two kings seldom talked to each other. They never really tried to free Edessa, and their combined force was finally crushed at Damascus. Jerusalem was taken back between the Second and Third Crusades. In 1187, the Kingdom of Jerusalem fell apart because of the pressure from the famous Muslim king Saladin. On July 4th, at the Battle of Hattin, Saladin beat most of the Crusader army. In late September, Saladin laid siege to Jerusalem itself. In October, Balian of Ibelin gave the city to Saladin. The 2005 Ridley Scott movie Kingdom of Heaven, which starred Orlando Bloom and Liam Neeson, was about the events of 1187 and called for a third crusade to take back the Holy Land. The Fourth Crusade split the Catholic Church in two. In 1202, the Fourth Crusade began. Crusaders from the Holy Roman Empire, France, and Venice surrounded Constantinople. They proceeded on a horrific rampage of murder, robbery, and arson as they brutally looted the city in 1204. Pope Innocent III, who had first called for the Fourth Crusade, scolded the Crusaders, yet he nonetheless took the money they brought back to Rome. Constantinople's immense Greek riches were either destroyed or stolen, and relatively few knights really went on to the Holy Land. The violent war between Greek and Roman Catholic Christians made the split between Eastern Orthodox Christianity and the Vatican permanent. It isn't better yet. The Third Crusade was started by Richard the Lionheart. As news spread across Europe that Saladin had taken Jerusalem, another call for the crusade went out. Philip II of France and King Henry II of England began to put together a new army. However, Henry died soon after, and Richard I took over. The kings planned the effort to take back Jerusalem with the support of Frederick Barbarossa, the old emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Frederick set out on his crusade alone since he couldn't wait for the other troops. This is common during the Crusades. He did well at first, but then he drowned while trying to cross a river. Most of his army turned around and went back to Germany before the French and English forces got to the Middle East. After a series of wars and killings, Saladin was defeated at Jaffa, which ended the Third Crusade. When a truce was reached, Jerusalem was still under Muslim authority. The Fifth Crusade came to a conclusion with a smart deal. Pope Innocent III and his successor called for another crusade to get Jerusalem back. In 1213, a party of knights from the Holy Roman Empire, Germany, Hungary, Austria, and France set off for the Holy Land after getting everything ready. They attacked Egypt before taking Jerusalem, but soldiers led by Saladin's nephew Al-Malik al-Kamil beat them. Al-Kamil agreed to a truce with the Crusaders and gave them back a piece of the true cross that had been stolen during the Battle of Hattin. Even if he didn't really hold the true cross, Al-Kamil used it as a bargaining chip. The Sixth Crusade did help the Europeans for a while. The Fifth Crusade failed 7 years before the Sixth Crusade began. There wasn't a lot of combat in this one, unlike most of the others. Instead, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II made a deal with Al-Kamil to get back some parts of Jerusalem. A big part of what is now Israel went back under Christian authority. Muslims still held the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque, though. A month after the agreement was reached in February 1229, Frederick came to the city. The Seventh Crusade was a disaster for Europe. For a short time, Christians did not govern Jerusalem. The last Khwarezmian Empire, which had been forced out of Iran by the Mongols, was told by Al-Kamil's descendants to attack the Holy City, which was not well defended, in 1244. The Khwarezmians completely devastated Jerusalem, leaving it in ruins. People didn't pay much attention since Europe was too engaged with other conflicts and issues with the papacy. King Louis IX of France was the only one angry enough to start the Seventh Crusade in response, although his weak effort cost tens of thousands of lives. After that, the timeline of the crusade gets a little messy. Louis IX of France advocated for another crusade because the Seventh Crusade's loss made him look bad. Some historians call this later effort the Eighth Crusade, while others consider it as a continuation of the Seventh. The Ninth Crusade, which happened a few years later, is often thought of as part of the Eighth, which makes things even more confusing. No matter what you call it, the Eighth Crusade was just as bad as the Seventh. In July 1270, Louis IX arrived in Tunis after gathering another army. When their army was under siege, the Crusaders went back to France, where a wave of anger killed Louis IX that year. The Mongols were involved in everything that happened. After the Khwarezmians took Jerusalem in 1244, a lot of European Christians looked for allies in unusual ways to fight the Muslim menace. The death of Genghis Khan's son and heir, Ogedai Khan, in 1242 put an end to the Mongol menace to Western Europe. During a break in fighting in the east, a Franco-Mongol alliance was suggested to take back Jerusalem from an empire that was already an enemy of the Mongols. Pope Innocent IV sent a monk named John of Plano Carpini to the Mongol capital of Karakorum in an uncertain letter. He asked for peace and aid with Islam. But Gayuk, the new Khan, told the Pope that he had to give in to Mongol rule. The coalition never happened, and the Mongols would later go to war with Islam and destroy Baghdad. The Ninth Crusade was the last one. The Ninth Crusade was the last of the Crusades. Most European countries didn't pay much attention to the call for the Ninth Crusade because they were already fighting with each other and the Mongols. In 1271, England, France, and a few other small countries made one last effort to take back Jerusalem, but the army was too small to do much damage. The Crusades ended with a 10-year truce, and by 1303, Muslims had complete control of the Holy Land. Many famous persons of the time were interested in the Crusades. Many famous people from European, Muslim, and Mongol history were involved in the 200 years of the Crusades. Many princes, dukes, and kings fought in the Crusades, including King Richard I of England, Eleanor of Aquitaine of France, Saladin, Balian of Ibelin, Frederick Barbarossa, King Edward I of England, also known as Longshanks, and several famous popes. Women were very important to the Crusades. Women defied many old gender preconceptions by taking part in all parts of the Crusades. While their husbands were away fighting, the wives of landowners took care of their properties. The Pope protected these women because refusing to do so would have kept males from joining the army. Many women, including well-known noblewomen, went with the Crusaders as nurses and camp companions. Muslim historians write about women fighting hard next to men, even if these stories are not agreed upon. Lastly, when aristocrats died and left their spouses' property and commodities, a lot of the inheritance culture that was common in Europe at the time was broken. It's possible that the famous Children's Crusade never happened. The Children's Crusade is one of the most controversial parts of studying this time period in the Middle Ages. People used to think that a French or German boy began preaching in 1212 that God had told him to free the Holy Land. He got a lot of kids together and guided them toward the Mediterranean Sea, hoping it would split up. If it didn't, the youngsters would be sold into slavery or drowned. Almost every component of this story is disputed by modern scholars. Many historical sources talk about the Crusade, however the stories are sometimes wrong or exaggerated. It's not clear if young people led the campaign or if there was a formal group. Scholars mostly agree that separate French and German groups, mostly made up of kids and led by charismatic boy preachers, set off for the Holy Land and met with disaster. The details will never be known. The Crusades had a huge effect on Europe. It is impossible to know exactly how many people died during the Crusades, but estimates range from 1 million to 9 million over the course of about 200 years. The Crusades had a lot of effects. The papacy got a lot of money and power from the wars, merchants and shipbuilders became very rich, and Europe learned about the beauty of trade with the East. They also wiped off many famous noble family lines, propagated many European cultural traits over the world, and got rid of most of the remains of feudalism. As part of European expansion that started with the Crusades, ships were dispatched to the New World. The return of Greek and Roman art to Europe was one of the things that sparked the Renaissance. The Crusades caused a huge increase in knowledge in Europe in arithmetic, architecture, and history. These are all things that are important to the modern world. It was shocking how anti-Semitic the Crusades were. When Urban II called for the First Crusade in 1095, there was a surge of violent anti-Semitism in Europe. During the Second Crusade, Jews in France were specifically targeted, and Jewish communities in the Rhineland were attacked on the way to Constantinople. It is ironic that German residents and officials would give Jews the most help, even though the hatred caused by the Crusades lasted long after they were over. People still talk about the Crusades, and they often get it wrong. For more than 1,000 years after they ended, the Crusades were forgotten by most people in Western Europe and the Middle East. The Christian world welcomed the Renaissance, which was followed by a rise in colonialism. As a result of 19th-century European nationalism, historians rediscovered the Crusades as great examples of French, British, or German chivalry and martial bravery. Both Western and Muslim pundits still use the term Crusades to mean atrocities. While liberals point out that mass slaughter happened on both sides, Western conservatives often see the Crusades as an attempt to rescue the Holy Land from pagan oppression. People said that President Barack Obama was putting down Christianity when he talked about the crimes that Christians did during the Crusades. But it is clear that Christian crusaders slaughtered many Jews, Muslims, Byzantine Greeks, and other people.